It's no secret that I'm kind of a cybersecurity and privacy nut, and it seems like every day there's a new reason to add another layer of tinfoil to my tinfoil hat. This time it's because of a study that was done by Duke University. Actually, they did it last year, but recently it's been getting more coverage about how slimy data brokers basically were selling information about active duty military personnel. And it's actually a lot worse than it sounds, and it already sounds pretty bad. You see, I don't just mean that they sold a bunch of blocks of data and it just happened to contain information about people in the US military, but rather, for just one example, they were actually advertising the fact that they could package the data on these military personnel by branch of service, location, even income. And they were even selling highly targeted state-specific data sets, like one that was literally called active military personnel in Alabama. And even worse is that these researchers kind of went out of their way to make themselves seem as sketchy as possible to the data brokers. For example, they literally contacted them through a new .asia domain they set up that just showed itself as being under construction, so not even a real website. They had it have a Singapore IP address, basically making it very obvious that this is not a real company trying to buy this data. And what's even crazier is one of the companies basically said, well, yeah, if you pay with a wire transfer instead of a credit card, then we don't even have to verify your identity. Insane. And to be clear, no, none of the data sets they purchased were anonymized or aggregated. All of them had personally identifying information about all the personnel without ever having to even prove their identity. And as for the price, apparently it was like 12 cents to 32 cents per record. I truly hate these companies. Now, I have made videos in the past with privacy tips, but I figured I could combine a lot of them here. And these are going to be including a lot of tips that I do not think you've heard before. It's not just going to be the general cliche stuff. For an example, kind of as a preview, to get telecom companies like your internet service provider or cell provider to stop selling your information, the magic phrase that you need to know and search for is CPNI, or Customer Proprietary Network Information. So you'd search for company name, CPNI, opt-out. This is a term specific to the telecom industry for information that they have about you and then go and sell for marketing purposes. Phone and internet companies usually have a dedicated page for opting out of this information. And a lot of times it's separate and not even accessible through your account settings. So you might opt out from certain marketing and then you'll have to just kind of know that this other CPNI thing exists and go find it and opt out it. And it turns out there's a few more of these magic phrases, I guess you could say. A lot of them have to do with specific legislation, these phrases being mentioned in laws. So first I'll go over more of those magic phrases to stop companies you do actually buy from spreading your information everywhere. And then I'll also go over some tips for how to prevent companies from getting your personal information in the first place. Before getting to that, one thing you can do for the data brokers, at least, is to submit data deletion requests to them. Unfortunately, there's a ton of them, but I do have a very relevant sponsor that can help big time, Aura. Among many other features, Aura, for example, can scan a bunch of the biggest data brokers and show me which ones are selling my info and automatically submit opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up this info not only helps reduce the amount of spam coming my way, but protects me from hackers who might leverage this info to try and access my accounts or even do personalized phishing attacks. I was even surprised when it showed me that the collected public info out there even included what kind of car I drive. But Aura also has a ton of other features such as antivirus, a VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, all in one place instead of needing a bunch of separate apps. And also very relevant is they have an email masking feature, so you can use site-specific email addresses, since a huge way your data across accounts is linked to you is by your email address. Even if you already have one or two of these tools, you could still be leaving doors open to bad actors. But Aura is always on, so you can have peace of mind and focus on other important stuff. So if you don't want to leave you and your family vulnerable, go to aura.com/Theojo and try your first 2 weeks free. Link is also in the description. And with all that being said, let's continue. All right, so back to the magic phrases that these companies absolutely do not want you to know. This is obviously most important to do with companies that you use regularly, like maybe it's a software subscription or even just a free social media site. But those that are subscriptions that you use all the time are just gonna have more data about you, so you may as well start with them. And by the way, when you search for these phrases, obviously you're gonna have to put the company name first, so you can find that page for it. I already talked about telecom companies and the customer proprietary network information, so I'm not going to repeat myself. So next, there's another one that's specific to financial institutions, and that would be, what does insert company name here do with your personal information? Searching with this phrase will almost always bring up a form or page that looks just like this. And that's because this form comes from an actual law, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which requires financial institutions to have a way for customers to opt out of them selling or sharing certain types of information. And that law has a model form, basically an example form in it that basically all companies are going to use just because it covers themselves if they use the same format that the law gives it as an example. So when you go to search for it, what you can do is put the company name, and then in quotes with a wildcard, you can put, what does asterisk do with your personal information? And that should basically bring it up immediately. And this freaking form is so hidden that I bet most people have never seen it, despite basically every financial company being required to have it. Anyway, if there is any information that they do sell and share that they are required to let you opt out of, then look for boxes that say to limit our sharing and or to limit direct marketing. And then it should have a link to where you can do that, or at least instructions for how to do it in your account. Unfortunately, I guess the law wasn't strict enough. You can't limit everything. Like with the city example, you can see that it says, yeah, we sell and share all this stuff, and no, you can't opt out of it, which is kind of infuriating, but hey, at least better than nothing. Now, again, that's all just for financial institutions, and of course, it's a US law, but who knows, if they have a branch in another country and they're based in the US, you could probably still take advantage of it. Now, another phrase that you're going to see on many, many websites is this one. It says your privacy choices, which will usually appear at the very bottom. And that's because this is coming from the Colorado Privacy Act, which requires a link that goes directly to opt-out options be on the homepage. And then the actual law has text as examples for what the link can say, and your privacy choices is one of them. And then I guess most companies just found that to be the best one, so you usually see that. Then there's also California's Consumer Privacy Act and California Privacy Rights Act that are kind of paired together. Anyway, the California Act requires that companies with a presence in the state have phrasing that also goes to an opt-out link, such as, do not sell or share my personal information. And also it may be required to say, limit the use of my sensitive personal information. So a lot of times you will see that at the bottom of a page. However, the law also does allow companies to instead use a link that is clearly labeled as being like an opt-out thing. And therefore you will see a lot of companies that instead use the your privacy choices example from the Colorado law. And then what they'll also do is there's actually a icon that California's law has that is this one. It doesn't replace the need for the disclaimer, but you'll usually see them combine the phrase from the Colorado one and the icon from the California one. So that's why you'll see this exact combination here a lot of times. Anyway, the thing is that the law requires that this link be available and that they have an option for California residents to opt out from data selling and sharing. However, many, if not most companies, don't necessarily actually verify that you are in California, or if they do, they just kind of like ask you to verify that you are, but probably don't look too much into it. And if there is a company that does make you jump through a million hoops to truly prove that you are a California resident and they're not willing to let you opt out if you're not, well, I would consider that anti-consumer and probably really try and not do business with them anyway. It's like a major red flag. Another phrase related to the California laws is right to opt out. This literally is in the California law in quotes, saying that businesses must provide consumers notice that they have the right to opt out of the sale or sharing of their personal information. So this means that you'll usually see those exact words appear somewhere near the opt-out settings of a website. Now, for those of you in Europe, or just anyone using a website based in Europe, there's a couple phrases you can search for, specifically object to processing and right to object. These phrases come from the GDPR's section about right to object to processing of personal data. And while I don't believe it's actually required for these literal phrases to exist on the website or anything, usually companies will mention these specifically to be sure to comply to the GDPR. Though, again, you'll probably only see this on websites based in Europe or ones that maybe are multinational, but still good to know about. Another phrase that I saw very commonly is your choices and controls. Now, I don't know exactly where this comes from. I couldn't find it specifically in quotes from any law, but there is a ton of companies that do use this phrasing or have a page or section named this, so you could also try searching for that. And then there is another phrase, which is opt out of the processing of. And this comes from a Texas privacy law. Now, the reason I would say to just search for this part is because the actual text of the law goes on to say the personal data, but a lot of websites usually say something like my personal data or my data, stuff like that afterwards. So this is the part that should be consistent. All right, so now that you know how to opt out and stop companies from hopefully selling as much info as you can that they already have, how do you stop them from getting this information in the first place? Well, usually it just involves not giving it to them in the first place. So some tips I would have is for websites where you can, just give them fake info. Like if they don't need to know your address, give them a fake address. There's one service, privacy.com, they're not sponsoring this video or anything, but they let you use virtual credit cards and then you can use whatever name and address you want. And a lot of websites will take it. And that's because the cards are actual Visa network cards. It's not like they're prepaid cards or anything that a lot of websites don't allow. Of course, for websites and companies that are actually important, like your bank, stuff like that, don't give them fake info. I mean, use common sense. Now, where you can't use fake information, like, they require some kind of phone number to verify via text, stuff like that. At least for a phone number, you can usually use a Google Voice number, which basically forwards it to you, and you can block it or even not even have it ring to your phone. So that's a nice option. Some websites are smart enough to block Google Voice numbers, but usually it works. And you can also use it for shipping and stuff. When's the last time you got a phone call from the delivery person? Almost never. Because there's a lot of things that you might not realize end up getting sold or shared, like voter registrations. Did you know that most states, or at least many, just have databases that companies can purchase of voter registration, including your phone number? That's why you get so many texts during election time. So if you use a Google Voice number, then, you just turn it off. Now for emails, what I would do is whenever you can, use site-specific emails. And there's options like iCloud has their hide my email thing. Also, another option is Simple Login. I think they got bought by Proton Mail. I've used them for a while. But basically, you just generate a thing, and it's like a shared domain between all the users. It's just a unique prefix thing, so they can't tie any individual user to the domain and link all your accounts and stuff by email at least. You can also use the Gmail trick where you add a plus after your name and then that still goes to you, but you can at least track who sold your email and stuff like that, which is kind of nice at least. And again, I will point out that the sponsor of the video, Aura, does have a email masking feature. Now, this one's more general and more of a security thing, but really I have to mention it because it's so important. Freeze your credit at all the credit bureaus, TransUnion, Equifax, and Experian. It's free these days. You log in, you don't have to mail in the thing like you used to. And when you do, they'll try to probably upsell you to a credit lock. Don't bother with that. Just do a credit freeze. That's all you need. Unfortunately, it doesn't stop soft credit inquiries, only hard ones, but it's good for preventing identity theft especially. And there's also another service that you should probably know about called The Work Number. You probably never heard of it, but a lot of companies use this as employment verification. They have info about the employment data of millions, most Americans actually, including your employment history, obviously where you used to work, and potentially, depending on what your employer gave them, when you started working, when you stopped working, whatever else they provided. So you're probably in that database and you can apparently freeze that report too. So it's just like a credit freeze. You have to thaw it yourself before anyone can go in and see it. So that might be one to look into to maybe freeze. So unfortunately, yeah, a lot of this is kind of a lot of work you have to go through to just keep your data safe, but eventually, hopefully, there will be some kind of federal legislation that'll make it easier to just opt out and stop these frickin' companies from selling our data and sharing it and stuff. So let me know what you think down in the comments. If you knew about these tips or not, I would be very curious to hear if you're going to start doing them. Thanks again to Aura for sponsoring the video. If you don't want to leave you and your family vulnerable, go to aura.com/theojo and try your first 2 weeks free. Link in the description. If you want to keep watching, the next video I'd recommend is where I talked about 17 computer tips that you probably wish you had known sooner. I'll put that link right there you can click on. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.